Joe Dumars looks like he can make the Pelicans the Celtics of the South, but that could also mean Zion Williamson is not part of the future. I'll explain in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Tuesday, and we got a lot to talk about. We're using a couple of jumping off points from The Athletic. There's some really good articles out there today that we're going to look at through the lens of New Orleans. And I want to look at the Boston Celtics and the person who runs them, the lead basketball decision maker, Brad Stevens. I think Joe Dumars has more in common with him than we might realize, and maybe that means he can make the Pelicans the Celtics of the South. We're going to break that all down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans because it has a big impact on Zion Williamson. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins over at FanDuel. So let's get into this. There's a couple of articles that I read over the weekend over at The Athletic that really jumped out at me in terms of kind of putting it through the lens in the context of the New Orleans Pelicans. And one of them is looking at Brad Stevens, the man who runs the Boston Celtics, formerly their head coach, kind of moving into, I don't know what his title is, GM, President of Basketball Operations, but it doesn't matter, lead basketball decision maker. And when you read that article, you know, it kind of goes into a lot of the core concepts that he believes in, the blueprint that he believes in for team building. Joe Dumars, I think, has the same attitude and mindset as Brad Stevens. And look at how good and consistent the Boston Celtics have become. They ran away with the title last year. They look like they're going to at least make the Eastern Conference Finals this season. So I want to get into a few things here, right? The too long didn't listen part of this is Brad Stevens is pretty skilled in identifying overlooked players and building a team of complementary parts. And Stevens wants to find talented players, but believes a successful team, involved far more than just your ability on the court. And this echoes a lot of what Joe Dumars said at his introductory press conference. He said he wants, there's two people walking in the door to your building. There's the player, and then there's the person. We can all see the player. We know who that player is, but who's the person inside? So I'm going to read you some quotes here. Quote, Brad understands the most important thing in any organization, whether it's the business world or the sports world, is people. Sounds a whole lot like Joe Dumars, doesn't it? Said Zach Hahn, who played at Butler under Brad Stevens. Quote, he surrounds himself and finds people that live by the same standards that he lives by, end quote. He's finding like-minded people as him because he knows what it takes to win. Right? Brad Stevens is a very accomplished coach. With what he did at Butler, taking them to back-to-back Final Fours is absolutely astounding. Joe Dumars has been around basketball. I can't say if the game has passed him by or anything like that, and I'd like to say no, it's not. But he knows what it takes to win, that kind of off-court intangible side of things. That hasn't changed over the years. Maybe three-point shooting's changed, other things has changed. But what you look for in players, those type of qualities, has not. That's something that Joe Dumars brings to this team. From the article, quote, Butler typically sought players from winning programs, Butler the school. It wanted players willing to put the team above individual success. When the assistants under Stevens attended high school games or AAU games to recruit, they weren't just evaluating a player's physical gifts or basketball IQ. They observed how players handled themselves in huddles, how they dealt with problems on the court, how they behaved when they were on the bench or in foul trouble. And quote from the article. Think about that for a second. That's the type of stuff, that mental resiliency, right? Grit, all of those things that's been lacking from this team. That stuff that Joe Dumars had in his playing career, those were the teams that he built in Detroit. Those were the teams he played on in Detroit. You think he's not going to be looking for those same qualities? Again, that transcends what year it is, what's in vogue or kind of the meta or popular with winning basketball games, in terms of which 5 players do you put on the court. You're looking for guys that just do the things correctly, all the other little things, right? Quote, the biggest thing in looking for guys was, did they fit the team concept, said Graves, now the head coach at Indiana State. And what I mean by that is, were they competitors? Did they care about winning? And were they great teammates? How did they act when they weren't playing well or when things weren't going well for them, end quote. That may as well be a quote from Joe Dumars' introductory press conference. He had said all of that. I want guys that want to be great. We'll talk about Zion Williamson and some of the other players on the team in the next segment here. Do they want to be great? Maybe they want to be great. Are they willing to put in the work to be great? Are you willing to elevate your team, sacrifice for the team? I don't think this team has a ton of guys that are always willing to do that, particularly kind of at the very top of the team, right? That's what they're looking for here. It's a different type of mentality. This goes to the culture that Joe Dumars had talked about. It's how you act and what you do on a daily basis. Quote, are you a snob? Johnson explained. Is your chest too big, too high when you walk through the hallway to talk to people? Or if you're walking by pieces of trash, would you pick it up? We looked out for things like that, or even something as simple as, how do you warm up? Does somebody need to motivate you, or are you bringing energy to your teammates? Rest of the article, another part says, the former Butler assistants have nodded their heads several times while watching the way Stevens has assembled the Celtics roster. They see his impact in the way his team has consistently avoided drama, secured buy-in, and acquired players committed fully to their development. He's looked for all the same qualities he would have wanted at that school. These are the type of things that I think Joe Dumars is going to bring to the team. These are the type of traits that Joe Dumars values. And when you read this article, right, and you see how it's molded the Boston Celtics with the culture. Think about guys like Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. Jason Tatum should be the face of the league. A guy that wins, that produces at a high level, that defends, but at times he's sacrificing for his teammates, so his numbers aren't as good as they could be. And he doesn't complain whatsoever, right? He could put himself above the team, but he doesn't. And when you look at how let's save that for the next segment. And we'll also talk a little bit about Zion. I'm going a little bit long in this segment here, but I want to get into it. When you hear how and look at some of the moves that Brad Stevens has made with the Boston Celtics, this is the specialty of Joe Dumars in acquiring those kind of players. Let's get into that and Zion Williamson. Does he fit with another article from The Athletic? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and with the live games going on. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Look, you can bet on Jalen Brunson to hit a game winner on the Boston Celtics or the Celtics just to sweep the series. They're big favorites, -8 on Tuesday night's game. And if you miss tip-off, it's okay. They have live in-game betting lines. So once the game tips off, you can still get in on the action. So new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Maybe we'll do a live show on Wednesday night. We'll see. TBD, but maybe we can make that work. That sounds like a lot of fun here. So we're talking about how Joe Dumars can make the Pelicans the Boston Celtics of the South, let's call it. You hear kind of what he's looking for, the intangibles, those kind of traits in players. And those are the same things that Brad Stevens is looking for and has built the Boston Celtics to be. Same thing with his time at Butler, too, and how he built those teams. One of the things, though, that you see, we've talked about the intangibles, right? But you also need talent. You need talent, too. But Brad Stevens finds those talented players and sometimes buys low on those players a little bit. And when you look at some of the guys that he's acquired, in learning more about Brad Stevens and even talking to someone like John Corrales of Locked On Celtics, who I host, by the way, Locked On NBA Game Night every Friday with. You should make that your second listen today. It's going to be an awesome one tomorrow with a bunch of games being played. So there you go. And, when you look at that, it acquires good players that come from winning organizations for the most part, or have kind of been discarded and it's a buy low. Does that remind you of anybody? Should remind you of Joe Dumars and how he built that title-winning Detroit Pistons team that didn't have an all-star at the time. Ben Wallace was kind of a cast-off, right? Chauncey Billups had been traded early on in his rookie year, but was a top 5 pick, and Joe Dumars knew to buy low on those guys, thinking that, all right, they're at the point in their careers where things are going to click, and it's going to make them even better here. And they kind of fit that mentality. They have those intangible qualities that he was looking for. Brad Stevens, trading for Drew Holiday when he became available. Drew Holiday, who's a winner and does just all of the right things. We know that one firsthand. But even buying low on someone that just fits what they're doing and can be a ancillary piece, you might call it, in Kristaps Porzingis, right? Kind of discarded by the Dallas Mavericks, in purgatory in Washington. He made a move for Kristaps Porzingis, someone I wanted at least on the New Orleans Pelicans, and traded away a guy that was important to the team in Marcus Smart, but he knew that he had to get pieces that also fit. So it's not just getting a bunch of intangibles on the team. This guy's tough, that guy's tough, that guy's tough, he's a leader. You got to be good players too. And you have to buy into what you're building here and be willing to sacrifice. Is that always what New Orleans has had? Sometimes Najee Marshall was definitely that guy. Drew Holiday was that guy. And Joe Dumars has a track record of acquiring those kind of players that really do help elevate you and help you win. And so I'm, as I think of Joe Dumars here, and I originally called this a lazy hire, and I still think it was. I don't like the process that they had. It doesn't mean that he won't succeed here in New Orleans. And when you look at what they're doing in Boston, this is kind of like a Joe Dumars specialty, and I would love to win, particularly in the way that the Boston Celtics are doing when it comes to that. Now, look, there's some things that put Joe Dumars at a disadvantage. This team not paying the luxury tax. Boston has one of the highest payrolls, has continued to have one of the highest payrolls as they've chased a title. That's an important thing to keep in mind with that too. But overall, I think Brad Stevens and Joe Dumars share a lot of the way they view team building and the traits that they are interested in. Let me ask you this. Of all the things we've kind of talked about, does Zion Williamson fit into that? I'm pausing for dramatic effect here. I think that's the open question here right now. And this is what we're kind of, is going to be a big determination. There's what do you do with Willie Green? But there's also what do you do with Zion Williamson? And does he fit the type of team that you want to build, right? This is a player who was suspended last season for being late to a team flight. Look, players are very regularly late to flights and things like that for the most part. Talking to people around the league, that's not an uncommon thing. You've never really heard of someone suspended for it, which tells you kind of how bad it got. And do you think it really changed for Zion Williamson after the fact? This is something that I don't think it's talked about enough when it comes to Zion. He often doesn't warm up before a game. You have those shoot-arounds beforehand, and everyone kind of has a time slot, and they go out and they work with their player development coach before a game. You don't see Zion do that, and I get to the arena 2.5 hours early before every game. Maybe he's doing it more on the road, and I'm not traveling with the team. Maybe he's going through it in the morning or something like that. But you had that quote in yours, does the player warm up? How do they warm up? Zion's not doing that necessarily. And I think that's a bit of a problem for this team. You often hear about things like the Jordan rules where, okay, players so good, you kind of put up with the stuff that comes around with that, right? If you go watch the Last Dance documentary, that whole, Dennis Rodman episode, right? They just let that dude go to Vegas and party with Carmen Electra for a couple of days just to get it out of his system and then come back and play good basketball for him. Or I think Jordan went and showed up and dragged him out of Vegas kind of thing. Sometimes you need to do that sort of stuff. But it ties into some other big news from the NBA right now, and that's Greg Popovich I would call it retiring from coaching. Given that it's a health issue, I get why people are stepping away from coaching and those things. Over at The Athletic, a friend of the show, Will Guillory, is a great writer there, but this one is written by Rustin Dodd, has, what can we learn from Greg Popovich about leadership? Our 4 favorite lessons, right? Popovich is the GOAT, in my opinion, when it comes to a head coach. One of the 4 lessons right here, I'll read them to you. Notice and reward the little things, okay? Don't be afraid of the road less traveled. Sure. Love and trust your people. I like that one. The one I want to focus on here, and I'll read this to you, is hold people accountable and push them to their personal best. I often hear accountability. Everyone says accountability. What does accountability mean? Right? Everyone says we want to hold people accountable. We want to hold the coaches accountable. The coaches say I want to hold the players accountable. What does that actually mean? Right? So here's what it says under hold people accountable and push them to their personal best. I love this. Quote, Popovich wasn't afraid to lay into players, but the way he treated everyone the same stuck with many. Consider this story from Pops Mensah-Bonsu, briefly with the New Orleans Hornets, who played just 3 games for the Spurs in 08-09. Quote, I was playing in a game and I messed up a defensive assignment, Mensah-Bonsu said. He takes me out of the game, yells at me, and sends me to the end of the bench. The next quarter, Tim Duncan literally makes the same mistake. I assumed the pot would just leave him in, but he subs him out and yells at Tim Duncan the exact same way and sends him to the bench right next to me. Timmy's response summed up their relationship and how the Spurs have been so successful for so many years. He looked at him and he said, "You're right, coach," and sat right down next to me on the bench. That summed up my whole experience in San Antonio, end quote. Think about that. Pops Mensah-Bonsu, cool name, right? But let's not pretend he was a good NBA player in any capacity. This is someone who, in a total of 4 years in the league with 5 different teams, right? Played 61 games, not even a full season over 4 years. He averaged for his career 3 points per game and 3 rebounds. And he played, on average, 8.3 minutes. New Orleans, by the way, the New Orleans Hornets, he played 7 games, averaging 0.3 points per game. And he's being treated the same as Tim Duncan, guy with 5 titles, one of the, you could argue a top 10, top 15 player of all time. And that's what led to Tim Duncan striving for success, right? Like he had a coach that knew what to do and treated everybody the same. So everyone was held to the same standard. That is something that this team kind of needs, right? There's maybe been some Zion rules to this. And I'm not saying that the team was babying Zion Williamson. You could very easily say Zion's camp and the organization did not get along famously for a number of years. Maybe because the Pelicans were trying something like this, right? Trying to hold Zion accountable, and they were like, yeah, no, we're not going to do this sort of thing. If that's the case, and you want to build that kind of culture that talks about what we talked about in the first segment here, does Zion Williamson fit in? I'm pausing for dramatic effect. Again, I don't have an answer to this question for you. Based on the surface, it don't feel like it. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have some of those Jordan rules for Zion Williamson, Zion rules and things like that. Because look, if you want to win a title, at least right now, he's likely your best chance for it. That creates all of this problem, right? That creates all the stuff around all of this and creates, kind of the issues that we're seeing with the team. And maybe that's just not someone you want to build around. And Joe Dumars is going to probably sit down with Zion Williamson, once he gets acclimated to all of this and figure it out and see if he feels this is someone that you can that will give you the buy-in that you need. Tim Duncan had all of the buy-in for Coach Popovich, right? All those guys did. All those guys were willing to sacrifice too. Manu Ginobili coming off the bench and all sorts of things like that. Is it time to take that approach with this team? Now, does this team deserve that kind of response from players? I think it's fair. Does Willie Green deserve that kind of respect from players? I mean, look, you want to have respect no matter what, so you should argue yes to that. But you get the point that I'm saying is this team might not be there yet, but you can start to lay the seeds of that and kind of start to build that culture, even if maybe it is not going to be exactly what you want in the first year, but it's something that you're striving towards. Look, we talk about the Willie Green decision all we want. The biggest question is going to be, is Zion staying or not? That's the biggest one to me. I don't have the answer for that. I don't know if Joe Dumars has the answer for that yet too. But kind of when you see some of these winning organizations, does Zion fit into all that? And I'm not sure the answer is yes. Could be. Easily could be. So coming up next, Speaking of kind of building your team, cornerstone players, we're less than a week away from the NBA lottery. This is arguably going to be one of the most important nights for the Pelicans that's out of their control. It's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans here. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And if you're going to be watching the lottery, I'm recording this Monday afternoon. I'm about to sneeze, so I apologize for that. Completely threw me off there. If you're going to be watching the lottery, what are you doing for good luck? Please help this team out, because this is a really key moment for the New Orleans Pelicans and their future. Right now, currently a 48.1% chance to land in the top 4, currently slotted 4th. A 12.5% chance to get the #1 overall pick in what's a pretty stacked draft. This is massively important for the Pelicans that they get some luck. This is completely out of their hands, right? This is literally ping pong balls in a closed room that's audited by, I think Ernst & Young does it, someone like that, one of like the big accounting firms. The Pelicans need some luck. You can drop up to 4 spots. The Pelicans have a chance of picking 8th overall. And I'll run through the odds again here for you. They have a 12.5% chance of landing the #1 overall pick. They have a 12.2% chance for the 2nd overall pick, an 11.9% chance at the 3rd overall pick, and the 4th overall pick, where they're slotted currently, is 11.5. Should they drop, because the lottery is for the top 4 spots, so in theory, 4 teams behind you could jump up. The chance of them picking 5th is 7.2. 6th is the most likely outcome for them, and that's 25.7. 7th is 16.8, and it's just a 2.2% chance that they could end up with the 8th overall pick. I think they need to be picking top 4 in this draft. I would really look 1 or 2, and I would be ecstatic. 3 is when things get a little bit interesting, truthfully. 1 and 2 make my job harder. Believe it or not, it makes my job as a podcaster harder, especially doing a show 5 days a week. If they get the #1 overall pick, I don't need to look at other draft prospects, right? We're just going to talk a lot about Cooper Flagg. Simple as that. There's only so much you can say, right? Like, it's going to be a lot of Cooper Flagg. And I'm sure y'all want to hear about Cooper Flagg should they get the #1 overall pick. But there's no intrigue. There's no drama. I can't sell you on other players or anything like that, because, look, they're not going to do it. Same thing if they get #2 overall, right? Dylan Harper just seems to make like a slam dunk sense there. No need to think about anyone else. I'd tease it out, be like, maybe you go Ace Bailey. Maybe you could see someone like VJ Edgecombe jump up, all that. 3 opens the door a little bit for a couple of players. Same with 4, 5, 6. 7 and 8 is a disaster scenario, and we'd be talking trades then. So if they get the 1st or 2nd overall pick, it makes my life harder to come up with content for y'all, truthfully. But I'm very happy if that ends up being the problem that I've got to deal with here. So this is completely out of the Pelicans' control. Those type of moments are scary, truthfully, right? Especially for, NBA franchises that tend to be a little bit like control freaks when it comes to everything. This is going to make or not make or break necessarily, but this is going to set the future of the future direction of the franchise. You can talk Joe Dumars and what he wants to do, make Pelicans like the Boston Celtics of the South, all of that stuff, right? And don't get me wrong, that matters here. But where you're picking in this draft after the season you just had is going to impact it more than anything else. You drop to 8, it changes the trajectory in the direction of your team. You're picking in #1 overall, and you can get Cooper Flagg, someone who would energize the fan base, is going to win and do all those things. Cooper Flagg fits all of those qualities we talked about in the beginning and second part of the show. Dylan Harper, I also think, kind of has that too, right? And look, David Griffin was looking for those qualities as well in players. That's the stuff that you look for when it comes to it. He just packaged it, I think, in a way where it's like, I want good humans on the team. And no one wants to hear that, right? I want hard workers. I want guys who have one, who know how to win on this team and want, do what it takes to win. Those are the kind of things you're looking for. It was just packaged, I think, really, really poorly with how he did it before. But that's largely what he was trying to do here. It's going to be interesting to see where the team falls, because this can, if you land 1 or 2 in this draft and you get what I think is a game-changing type of player, a paradigm-shifting kind of player, a cornerstone player, if you want to be competitive next year, you can trade Zion or you can kind of build more long-term for the future. What you're hoping for is to find those guys, that prospect that becomes the cornerstone. You draft the cornerstone and then you build around them. You can do that sooner rather than later. Or if you're in that spot where you don't have that guy, look at the Utah Jazz, you end up tanking for a couple of years, wasting, the prime of someone like Larry Markkinen, because it shows they don't believe that he's the guy to kind of build around. Look at a team like the Chicago Bulls. What are they doing? What direction are they going in? There really isn't one, because they don't have that cornerstone player to build around. You need that kind of player. San Antonio Spurs, Victor Wembanyama. Let's go add De'Aaron Fox and let's go all in on this sort of thing. You look at the Houston Rockets just losing in Game 7 to the Golden State Warriors. Does that kind of change their direction and how they operate, right? Because do they have that number one guy? And I'm not sure that they do. Maybe it's Şengün, maybe it's not. So maybe they want to go and get Giannis, who is that number one guy. When you have that number one guy, it becomes a whole lot easier, and you can get out of the tank, you can get out of the rebuild quicker because you know what you need at that point in time. We thought the Pelicans had that with Zion Williamson, and then he's just not played enough to be that guy that would tank any team, hurt any team. So do what you can to add some luck to the team to help, pray to the NBA basketball gods, just basketball gods. It's not NBA gods. It's overall basketball gods. Talk to the voodoo priestesses, all of those things. You're going to need it a little bit to try and help this team, because they need to land a top 4 pick in this draft, ideally top 2. It's less than a week away. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll be live during the lottery for it. I've done that most years, but when they've got number 1 overall the past 2 times they've had it, I've been live doing a live show. We'll do it again for this one as well. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.